What does it feel like to be invisible in a world that only sees talent once it's wrapped in fame? For years, Rico de la Cruz, a quiet Filipino janitor in Los Angeles, had lived under the fluorescent hum of stage lights, not on them, but beneath them. Each night, while others chased dreams, he mopped the floors of the same auditorium where dreams were born. He listened to echoes of singers rehearsing, applause fading into silence, and somewhere deep inside him, a small spark whispered, "That could be me." But who would believe a janitor had the voice of a legend? To everyone, Rico was just another immigrant worker, humble, unnoticed, and tired. He carried a worn-out radio in his cart, its paint peeling, its antenna bent. And yet, when he pressed play, the timeless voice of Elvis Presley filled the halls, and Rico sang along softly, his tone hauntingly similar. It was a secret he had guarded for decades, a treasure hidden behind rough hands and worn shoes. No one knew that back home in Cebu, before life turned hard, he had once been the Elvis of the islands, singing at small bars, winning hearts with every trembling note. But time had stolen that dream, leaving him only echoes. Until one day, fate walked through those same doors. Maya, a young AGT production assistant, heard a familiar melody drifting from the empty stage, a janitor singing, "Can't Help Falling in Love." She froze. The voice didn't just imitate, it felt. It carried longing, pain, and the unmistakable warmth of a soul that had lived through heartbreak. That night, Maya couldn't stop thinking about him. Could this man, the one everyone ignored, really bring Elvis back to life? And so began a journey that would test faith, courage, and the power of one moment on a world stage. Because sometimes, the ones no one believes in are the ones who end up changing everything. Rico de la Cruz was a man who had learned to live quietly, like a melody played under the noise of life. In his late 40s, with graying hair tucked beneath a faded cap and eyes that carried the softness of old dreams, he blended into the background of every room he entered. His uniform smelled faintly of disinfectant, and his shoes were worn from years of walking the same echoing halls of the AGT studio. Every morning, he clocked in before dawn, pushing his mop through long corridors that once filled with cheers and laughter. Sometimes, he would pause near the stage lights and stare up at the empty seats, imagining the applause, the warmth of the spotlight, and the thrill of holding a microphone again. Then, with a small, wistful smile, he would return to his work, because dreams, for him, were luxuries he could no longer afford. Rico lived alone in a modest apartment on the outskirts of Los Angeles. His walls were lined with old posters of Elvis Presley, their edges curling from time. Each night, after his shift, he'd heat leftover rice, sit by the window, and hum softly to himself. Music was his way of remembering who he once was, a young man who sang barefoot in Filipino bars, believing his voice could carry him anywhere. But life had a way of dimming even the brightest notes. A failed marriage, debts, and the weight of surviving in a foreign country had buried his passion under years of exhaustion. Yet, his voice, deep, rich, and eerily close to Elvis's, remained untouched, like an ember waiting to reignite. Rico's co-workers thought he was shy, maybe even strange. They never knew that the quiet janitor who cleaned their dressing rooms once dreamed of singing on that very stage. Still, every time he polished the golden AGT sign, he whispered to himself, maybe someday. He wasn't bitter, just quietly hopeful. A man who had accepted his place in the shadows but never stopped listening to the music inside him. Because even when no one believes in you, the heart remembers who it was meant to be. There are moments in life when silence becomes heavier than sound. For Rico de la Cruz, that silence followed him everywhere, echoing in the clatter of his cleaning cart, lingering in the empty halls after shows ended. It was the silence of being unseen, unheard, and forgotten. Years ago, back in Cebu, music had been his lifeline. He had sung in tiny cafes, dressed in white suits, curling his lip just like Elvis, and the crowds had cheered. But dreams have a cruel way of fading when life demands survival. When his mother fell ill, Rico sold his guitar to pay for her medicine. When the bills piled up, he left for America, promising himself he would sing again one day. But one day became years, and the spotlight dimmed into memory. Now, each night as he mopped the AGT stage, he watched other people chase the dream that once belonged to him. Contestants cried, judges clapped, lights flared, and he swept it all away, like it was never there. Every applause reminded him of what he'd lost. Every shining star was a reflection of what he could have been. Loneliness had become his closest companion. He had no family in the city, no friends waiting for him after work. Sometimes, he called his sister in the Philippines, pretending he was fine. "Work is good," he'd say, forcing a smile she couldn't see. But deep inside, a voice whispered, "You gave up too soon." The world saw him as a cleaner, not a singer. And that truth stung the deepest. He often wondered if it was too late, if dreams had an expiry date, if the man he used to be had already disappeared. Then came the night that changed everything. A routine shift, an empty stage, a moment of weakness. He picked up a microphone left behind and sang, not for fame, but for himself. His voice trembled through the dark room, raw and real. What he didn't know was that someone was listening. That voice, long buried in silence, was about to awaken something far greater than he ever imagined. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday night, the kind Rico had lived 100 times before. The studio was nearly empty, the last of the contestants had left, and the glow of the stage lights faded into quiet amber shadows. He was cleaning the edge of the judge's table when he noticed a single microphone resting there, forgotten. Something in him stirred, an ache, a pull he couldn't resist. He looked around. No one was there. The vast theater was silent, holding its breath. For a moment, he imagined the seats filled again, imagined the music swelling. Then, without thinking, he picked up the microphone. At first, his voice came softly, hesitant, trembling. But as he sang the opening lines of "Can't Help Falling in Love," something shifted. The years of pain, loneliness, and faded dreams began to pour out through every note. His voice wasn't just a copy of Elvis's, it was his own soul, wrapped in warmth and heartbreak. The sound floated through the empty room like a prayer, tender yet powerful. What Rico didn't know was that Maya, a young production assistant, had returned to retrieve her clipboard. When she heard the song echoing from the stage, she stopped mid-step. The voice was hauntingly familiar, like Elvis had come back to life. But it wasn't mimicry, it was emotion. It was truth. She watched from the shadows as the janitor stood under the soft light, his eyes closed, lost in the music. Tears gathered in her eyes. It wasn't just beautiful, it was pure. The next morning, Maya couldn't shake the moment from her mind. She searched through the studio's employee list, found Rico's name, and made a bold decision. Without telling him, she sent a short clip of his singing, recorded from her phone, to a senior producer at America's Got Talent. That single act, born from awe and belief, set in motion something extraordinary. Rico had spent years hiding behind a mop and bucket, but fate had just handed him a microphone. And soon, the man no one believed in would step onto the same stage he once cleaned, this time under the brightest lights of all. When the AGT producers called Rico, he thought it was a mistake. They said someone had submitted a clip of him singing, and they wanted him to audition. His first instinct was fear. He had no confidence, no fancy clothes, no dreams left to chase. He wasn't a performer anymore, just a janitor who happened to sound like someone famous. That night, he sat in his small apartment, staring at the phone on his table. Could he really step onto that stage, the same one he had polished for years? His hands trembled as he thought of the crowd, the judges, the millions watching. Doubt whispered cruelly, "You don't belong there." But beneath the fear, something stirred, a quiet voice reminding him that maybe, just maybe, this was his second chance. The days leading to his audition were filled with sleepless nights and self-doubt. He practiced in front of a cracked mirror, his reflection showing not a star, but a man worn by life. Each time he sang, memories surfaced, the mother who had believed in him, the dreams he had buried, the younger version of himself who once dared to believe. He struggled not just against fear, but against years of silence that had convinced him he was invisible. Every time he opened his mouth to sing, he fought the weight of his past, the rejection, the regret, the loneliness. Yet, through the struggle, he began to see something powerful. His pain had given his voice its depth. His losses had made his sound real. When he finally walked into the AGT rehearsal room, he felt every heartbeat echo in his chest. But he also felt lighter, as if the years of doubt were finally fading. He realized this moment wasn't about fame or winning. It was about reclaiming the part of himself he had long abandoned. For the first time in decades, Rico didn't feel like a janitor or a failure. He felt like a man who had endured, who had something to say, not with words, but with music. And as he took a deep breath before stepping on stage, he knew, even if no one clapped, he had already won back his voice. When the last note of Rico's song faded into silence, the entire theater stood still. It was as if time had paused to listen. Then came the roar of applause, thunderous, unending, alive. Simon Cowell's eyes glistened, the judges were speechless. And Rico, standing under the blinding lights, could only bow his head as tears streamed down his cheeks. For the first time in his life, people were not just hearing his voice, they were feeling it. The man who once cleaned the stage was now owning it. The same hands that pushed a mop now held a microphone that echoed around the world. But more than the cheers, more than the golden buzzer, what filled Rico's heart was peace. He had not just proved others wrong, he had finally believed in himself again. In the days that followed, his story spread everywhere. Headlines called him the janitor who sounded like Elvis. But behind that title was a deeper truth, one about faith, humility, and the quiet power of never giving up. Rico's journey wasn't about fame, it was about rediscovering worth after years of invisibility. He returned to his small apartment, still humble, still grateful. The posters of Elvis on his wall seemed to smile differently now. His life hadn't become perfect, but his soul had found its home again, in music, in courage, in self-belief. The world often celebrates success, but Rico's story reminded everyone that true success isn't found in trophies or titles, it's in finding your voice after years of silence. It's in standing tall even when life bends you low. He taught millions that dreams don't die with age, and talent doesn't fade with struggle. Sometimes, it just waits, for one brave moment to rise again. So if you ever feel unseen or unheard, remember Rico, the man no one believed in, until he sang. Because inside every quiet soul lives a song the world needs to hear. All it takes is courage to sing it out loud.